I've learned over a long life that families don't always break you with fists or fights. Sometimes they break you with laughter, quiet little jabs that slip under your skin and stay there. That's what my brothers used to do. They called me a deadbeat so many times that after a while the word stopped sounding like an insult and started sounding like my name. I'd show up to family dinners and hear them whisper about my beat-up truck, my thrift store clothes, the simple life I lived. They never asked why. They never cared to. I remember one Christmas when they gave each other gifts worth more than everything I owned. Watches, designer jackets, expensive shoes. I sat on the far end of the couch holding a gas station coffee mug they'd bought as a joke. They laughed. The whole room laughed, and I just smiled like it didn't bother me. An old man learns to swallow a lot in this life. But I kept a secret, not out of spite, not out of pride. I kept it because nobody ever asked the right questions. Years back, before my father passed, he gave me a stretch of land. Not because I earned it or because I was his favorite, but because I was the only one who cared about the old place. My brothers brushed it off as a worthless patch of dirt. They were too busy climbing ladders and collecting trophies to think about soil and trees and quiet spaces. They forgot about it. I didn't. And when they started building those big glass-front mansions years later, I never said a word. Funny, isn't it? The men who mocked me for having nothing never once checked who actually owned the ground under their feet. They just assumed the world belonged to them. They assumed I wouldn't matter. Life has a way of circling back. Sometimes slow, sometimes sudden, but always right on time. I'm going to tell you exactly how the truth came out, how a simple piece of paper flipped our entire family upside down. And if you've ever been underestimated by people who should have known better, you might hear a little of yourself in this story. Stick with me. It gets good. And if you find stories like this hit a little too close to home, you can always stick around for the next one. I've got plenty more where this came from. Let's begin at the moment everything started to crack. The first real crack showed up on a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind where the air sits heavy and even the birds sound tired. I was out by the old fence line, walking the property like I always did, making sure the trees were healthy and the ground hadn't shifted after the last rain. That land had become more than just dirt to me over the years. It was quiet. It was steady. It didn't judge or compare or laugh behind my back. It was the only place where I didn't feel like an outsider in my own family. I heard the engines before I saw the cars. My brothers always traveled in packs, even as grown men with gray at their temples. Two matching SUVs rolled down the gravel road toward me, throwing dust into the air like they owned the path. They parked close, too close, doors swinging open before the engines even stopped. The first one out was my oldest brother, Michael. He always carried himself like the world owed him something. Behind him stepped Dustin, the middle one, who followed Michael like a shadow that couldn't think for itself. They both wore those expensive sunglasses, the kind that made it hard to see if they were talking to you or looking through you. "Harry," Michael said, his voice full of that same tone I'd heard since childhood. Superior, cold. "We need to talk." I didn't bother asking about what. Men like them don't drive 30 minutes from their gated community just to say hello. I leaned on the fence, letting the wood support my back. "What's on your mind?" I asked. Dustin stepped forward, and I could smell the cologne from 10 feet away. "We're expanding," he said. "Putting in a pool house, maybe a tennis court. Contractors say we need to grade the hill on the east side." I knew exactly what hill he meant. My hill. "And?" I said, keeping my voice steady. Michael lifted his chin. "We need you off this land, permanently. We've got plans for the whole stretch, and having you hanging around complicates things." There it was, not a request, a command, like they were granting me permission to breathe their air. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at them, really looked at them. Two men who spent their lives building bigger houses, bigger egos, bigger shadows. And somehow they still felt small. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Because we're tired of you squatting on property that's basically ours," Michael snapped. I almost laughed. "Basically?" I said. "Funny word." Dustin folded his arms. "Look, Harry, we don't want trouble. We'll toss you some money, help you relocate. It's time you moved on." Relocate. That was their way of saying get lost. For a moment I considered telling them everything. The deed. The signature. The fact that my name, my full legal name, was carved into the records at the county office. But something inside me held back. Maybe it was the way they didn't even try to hide their contempt. Maybe it was the years of being dismissed, ignored, and talked over. Or maybe it was the small, mean part of me that wanted to see how far they'd go before the truth slapped them across the face. "I'll think about it," I said. Michael nodded like he'd won. "Good. We'll send over some paperwork." They turned to leave, already talking about contractors and deadlines. Not once did they look back. I stayed there long after the sound of their engines faded. Their words didn't hurt. Not anymore. But something else did. It was the realization that after all these years, they never once wondered if I held anything of value. Not land, not pride, not even a spine. They were about to find out how wrong they were. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt ready. Ready for the truth to finally come out. A week passed before anything else happened, and I spent most of it walking the property with a quiet sense of anticipation. Not anxiety, not dread. Just a calm sort of knowing. The kind you get when you've held the truth for so long that it becomes part of your bones. I didn't have to rush anything. The land wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the truth. On Thursday morning, I found a thick envelope shoved into my rusty old mailbox. The return address wasn't my brother's home's. It was from some shiny law firm downtown, the kind with marble floors and receptionists who speak in whispers. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I took my coffee out to the porch, sat in my favorite chair, and watched the sun climb over the ridge like I'd done every morning for years. When I finally tore the envelope open, I didn't feel anger. I felt something closer to amusement. Inside was a neatly typed letter explaining, in the most polite and condescending language imaginable, that my presence on the land was no longer necessary, and that my brothers were ready to offer generous compensation for me to vacate their property. They didn't even bother to hide the arrogance behind legal jargon. They wanted me gone, clean, quiet, no resistance. Attached was an offer amount. I stared at the number for a long moment. It wasn't generous. It wasn't fair. It wasn't even respectful. It was an insult, wrapped in a bow, handed to me by people who believed I should be grateful for the scraps they tossed my way. I folded the papers, slipped them back into the envelope, and set it on the table. I didn't need to respond right away. They'd come looking for me again. People like them always do when they think they hold all the cards. 2 days later they did. This time only Michael showed up, rolling onto the property in a new luxury car that looked like it had never touched real dirt before that moment. He got out slowly, adjusting his cufflinks even though he wasn't wearing a jacket. "You get our offer?" he said, walking over like he owned the place. I did. "And?" "It was cute." He blinked like he'd misheard me. "What?" I said it was cute. Like when a kid offers you a handful of pennies and thinks he's buying your truck. His jaw tightened. "Harry, this isn't a joke." "No," I said, "it isn't." He shifted his weight, hands on his hips. "We're trying to help you here. We don't want to drag this out. We need the land clear. We're planning another build, something big. Investors are involved now. You taking space out here is hurting the timeline." There it was, that little phrase that told me everything I needed to know. Investors. Bigger stakes. More money on the line than my brothers wanted to admit. They weren't just building mansions out of ego anymore. They were building a full development, a community, something that required banks and approvals and signatures. Signatures like mine. I kept my face straight. "Well, if you need my help," I said calmly, "you should have started by treating me like a human being." "We treat you fine," he snapped. "Michael," I said, "you gave me a gas station coffee mug for Christmas." He opened his mouth, closed it, then waved a dismissive hand. "Look, just tell us what you want. Money, a place to move, we can—" "I want you," I said, "to stop assuming you own everything you touch." He frowned hard. "Harry, we do own this land." That line, those 7 words, hit me different. Not because they hurt, but because they showed just how deeply their arrogance ran, how blind they were, how confident in their own version of reality they'd become. I didn't correct him, not yet. Instead, I nodded toward the hill. Let's take a walk. He hesitated, confused, but followed me anyway. We stood on that rise overlooking both their mansions, perched like trophies, all glass and angles and expensive landscaping that cost more than my yearly income. Beautiful view, isn't it? I said. He glanced at me, irritated. Harry, what does this have to do with anything? Oh, everything, I said quietly. For the first time in years, I felt my father standing beside me, not physically, but in memory. I remembered him handing me that deed. I remembered him saying, "You're the only one who'll understand what this place means." And I did, more than he ever knew. Michael crossed his arms. Are we going to settle this or not? Oh, we're going to settle it, I said. But not the way you think. I could see the confusion crawling across his face, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small around him. For the first time, he felt small around me. And that was the moment I knew. The reckoning had already begun. They just didn't see it coming. I didn't sleep much the night after Michael and I stood on that hill. Not because I was worried. Worry was something they'd wrung out of me a long time ago. But because I knew the moment I told the truth, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. You don't drop a revelation like the one sitting in my filing cabinet without knowing it's going to cause a quake. And if I was being honest with myself, I wanted that quake. I wanted the ground to shift under them for once. The next morning, I pulled out the old metal cabinet where I kept every important paper I'd collected in my life. Tax returns, birth certificates, service records, a couple of letters from my father, and then the one that mattered most, the deed. It was yellow around the edges from age, and the ink was faded in a few places, but my name was written on it clear as day. Not my brother's, not any corporation, not any development group. Mine. I stared at that paper for a long minute, remembering the day Dad handed it to me. He'd been tired, more tired than I'd ever seen him, and he'd told me quietly that sometimes the world didn't reward the loud ones. Sometimes it rewarded the ones who listened, the ones who paid attention, the ones who cared about what everyone else stepped over. I never fully understood what he meant until now. By the afternoon, the rumble of engines echoed across the property again. Both brothers this time, and they weren't smiling. They walked up to the porch like men marching into battle. Dustin held a folder in his hands, and Michael had that stiff posture he got when he thought he was about to win. "We need to talk," Michael said. "You've been doing a lot of that lately," I replied, rocking gently in my chair. "Go on." Dustin stepped forward and opened the folder. "We brought a final offer. We upped the payout. It's more than fair, Harry. Sign this today and we can start the relocation process immediately." I didn't even look at the papers. No. The word hung in the air long enough for a breeze to carry it back to them. Dustin blinked like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Michael didn't blink at all. He just narrowed his eyes. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "We're trying to close deals with investors, and they need to know you're not going to interfere with the project." "I'm not interfering," I said. "I'm just staying right here." Michael let out a breath as sharp as broken glass. "Harry, you don't own this." I stood up, slow, calm, like an old man getting ready to stretch his legs. But inside, something steady was rising, something I hadn't felt since the days when Dad would tell us to stand up straight and say what needed saying. "Michael," I cut in, "you keep repeating that line like it's going to become true if you say it enough times. But you and I both know you never checked a single thing before you built out here. You assumed. And assumptions come with consequences." Dustin frowned. "What consequences?" I went inside the house without another word. I could feel their impatience vibrating behind me, the way spoiled boys get when they think they're being ignored. I opened the drawer, took out the deed, and walked back outside. When they saw the paper in my hand, their faces shifted in unison. Confusion first, then suspicion, then something close to fear. "What's that?" Dustin asked. I held it up. "Your foundation." Michael stepped forward, snatching for the paper, but I pulled it back before he could touch it. "Not so fast," I said. "You've spent years calling me a deadbeat, years mocking me for living simple, years assuming I had nothing." I shook the deed slightly. "But this right here, this is the land your houses sit on. Every bedroom, every tile, every pool, every inch of it." "That's impossible," Michael said, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. "You sure about that?" I asked, handing the deed over slowly, deliberately. He grabbed it, scanned the page, then looked up at me with a face drained of color. Dustin leaned over his shoulder, eyes darting back and forth across the lines of text. "Dad gave this to you," Dustin whispered. "Before he passed," I said. "Told me to take care of it, told me to keep it safe, and I did." "But this land," Michael said, his voice breaking just a little, "this land is the entire foundation of the development." "That's right. You should have told us." "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow. "Like how you told me you were building mansions out here. Like how you showed up with lawyers and told me I needed to get out of the way." I shrugged. "Funny how communication works differently when you need something." Michael paced. Dustin rubbed his forehead like he was fighting a migraine. They both looked like men standing on a sinking ship, praying the water wasn't rising as fast as it felt. "So what do you want?" Michael asked finally, voice barely above a growl. "Money? Half the profits? The whole project?" I looked out across the land, acres of soil my father walked, the hill where I first realized how much they'd underestimated me, the trees that had watched this confrontation unfold. "What I want," I said slowly, "is respect. Something you never gave me. Not once. Not when we were kids. Not when we were grown men. Not ever." Neither of them spoke. "But since you asked," I continued, "I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen." They both looked up, dread settling in their eyes. "You're going to stop talking to me like I'm nothing. You're going to renegotiate this project with me as the landowner, and you're going to do it with the same professionalism you give every investor in your portfolio." "And if we don't?" Michael asked quietly. I pointed at their mansions, standing proud and tall on my soil. "Then I sell the land from under your feet," I said, "and you can explain to your investors why their multi-million-dollar homes are sitting on property they don't own." Silence fell heavy between us. For the first time in our lives, they finally understood. I wasn't the weak one. I wasn't the failure. I wasn't the deadbeat. I was the man holding the ground beneath them. And they had no idea what else was coming. Michael didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there holding that deed like it was a live wire, something that might burn him if he gripped it too tight. Dustin looked from him to me and back again, like he was waiting for someone to tell him what to think. It struck me then, really struck me, that for all their money and mansions and meetings with investors, neither of them had ever learned how to react when they weren't holding the upper hand. I walked back to my porch and sat down slowly, letting them stew in the silence. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just knew that if I tried to comfort them or soften the truth, they'd take it as weakness. And I wasn't giving them that, not anymore. "Sit," I finally said, nodding toward the steps. They hesitated, then sat. Two grown men who'd spent their whole lives towering over me now sat lower than my rocking chair. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Michael cleared his throat. "Harry, we didn't know. You have to believe that." "I do believe it," I said. "That's the whole problem." Dustin leaned forward. "Okay, so we renegotiate. You'll get a fair cut. We can fix this." I shook my head. "You're not hearing me. This isn't about money. It's not about cuts or shares or percentages. It's about the years I spent being treated like a burden to my own blood. Now the ground's shifted, and before we talk business, we're going to talk truth." They both stiffened. I didn't care. "When Dad gave me this land," I continued, "you two were too busy trying to prove to the world how important you were. You didn't ask what it meant. You didn't ask why he trusted me with it. You didn't ask why he didn't sell it or split it up." Michael looked down. Dustin picked at a spot on his jeans like a nervous child. "You know what your problem's been your whole lives?" I asked quietly. Michael looked up, eyes tight. "What?" "You only see value in things when they can be measured in dollars, and you only see worth in people when they can do something for you. That's the lens you see the whole world through." "That's not fair," Dustin muttered. "It's the truth," I said, "and deep down you both know it." The wind blew through the trees behind us, a soft whistle carrying a weight I'd felt for decades. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Michael let out a long breath. "Okay," he said finally. "Where do we go from here?" I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper I'd written the night before. Not a contract, not demands, just terms of conversation. You can take this or leave it, I told them as I handed it over. But I'm not budging on any of it. Michael unfolded it, reading aloud. Respect, transparency, equal decision-making, regular communication, written agreements, no more backdoor deals, no more surprises. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. And a verbal apology? I nodded. Not for the land, for the way you've treated me for years. I don't need theatrics, I just need honesty. Dustin swallowed hard. You're asking us to admit we were wrong. Yes, I said, because you were. Michael rubbed his face like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Harry, you're asking for something we've never had in this family. No, I corrected gently. I'm asking for something I've never gotten, but you've taken it for granted your whole lives. He looked at me for a long moment, then at the paper again, then back at me. His jaw twitched, but his voice came out steady and low. Fine, he said. You're right. We treated you like nothing. We thought you were going nowhere, that you didn't have ambition or drive. We were. He stopped, like the word was stuck in his throat. We were wrong. Dustin spoke next, softer, more genuine. I'm sorry, Harry, really. A strange feeling washed through me. Not triumph, not gloating. Something quieter, sadder. Like a wound that had been open for far too long finally getting a chance to breathe. Thank you, I said. Michael exhaled. All right, so we work together now. We fix this mess before the investors start asking questions. I nodded. We will, but first, you need to understand the hole you've dug yourselves into. They looked at each other, then back at me with matching expressions of dread. You built multi-million-dollar homes on land you don't own, I said. You took out loans using those properties as collateral. You promised investors guaranteed square footage expansions. You cut legal corners assuming no one would check the foundation. And you signed contracts betting that this land was yours. Dustin's face went pale. How screwed are we? Bad, I said. Real bad. Michael gripped the steps so hard his knuckles whitened. So you're holding all the leverage? Yes, I said simply. He nodded slowly. Then tell us what you want us to do. For the first time, they weren't talking down to me. They weren't mocking me. They weren't steamrolling me. They were listening. I want to do this right, I said. Not just for me. Not just for the land. For Dad. For our family name. And because I know the two of you aren't bad men. You're just men who forgot where they came from. Michael looked away like the words stung. So here's what happens next, I continued. We're going to meet with your investors, together. I'll show them the deed myself. We'll form a new partnership, equal ownership, equal profit, equal responsibility. And you're going to learn to treat me like the brother I always was. And if they refuse? Dustin asked quietly. Then I sell, I said, and everything you built goes with it. The silence that followed wasn't angry, it wasn't defensive, it was acceptance, the kind that comes when a man realizes the ground beneath him isn't as solid as he once believed. Michael nodded, slow and resigned. All right, he said, let's do it your way. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Good, because the storm's coming, boys. And this time I'm sitting at the table when the lightning hits. They both stared at me with a mix of fear and respect they'd never shown before. For the first time in my life, they finally saw me. Not as the deadbeat, not as the disappointment, but as the man who held the land and the future in the palm of his hand. Dustin's face went pale. How screwed are we? Bad, I said. Real bad. Michael gripped the steps so hard his knuckles whitened. So you're holding all the leverage? Yes, I said simply. He nodded slowly. Then tell us what you want us to do. For the first time, they weren't talking down to me. They weren't mocking me. They weren't steamrolling me. They were listening. I want to do this right, I said. Not just for me. Not just for the land. For Dad. For our family name. And because I know the two of you aren't bad men. You're just men who forgot where they came from. Michael looked away like the words stung. So here's what happens next, I continued. We're going to meet with your investors, together. I'll show them the deed myself. We'll form a new partnership, equal ownership, equal profit, equal responsibility. And you're going to learn to treat me like the brother I always was. And if they refuse? Dustin asked quietly. Then I sell, I said, and everything you built goes with it. The silence that followed wasn't angry, it wasn't defensive, it was acceptance. The kind that comes when a man realizes the ground beneath him isn't as solid as he once believed. Michael nodded, slow and resigned. "All right," he said, "let's do it your way." I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Good, because the storm's coming, boys. And this time I'm sitting at the table when the lightning hits." They both stared at me with a mix of fear and respect they'd never shown before. For the first time in my life, they finally saw me. Not as the deadbeat, not as the disappointment, but as the man who held the land and the future in the palm of his hand. And if you've walked through your own storm of family betrayal, or if you're carrying a truth nobody ever bothered to ask you about, don't wander off just yet. I've got more stories sitting on the porch waiting for you, stories where the quiet one rises, where the forgotten one wins, where the tables turn in ways nobody sees coming. If you want to hear about the son who was cut out of the will but still ended up owning all 12 properties his siblings fought over, or the husband everyone thought was broke until the offshore accounts surfaced at the divorce hearing, or the uncle who lost everything until the secret land deed flipped the entire family tree upside down, stick around, pull up a chair. There's always another story, and trust me, each one hits just a little harder than the last. Click on another tale from the channel, and let's see which truth wants to come out next.